Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Mary Spencer, and thank you for joining this evening with the Livonia Civic Center Library. And Mary's going to do 2 demos tonight. One is going to be a galette, squash galette, and then the other one is going to be a soup. So Mary, you can begin.
All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for letting me into your living rooms or your kitchens, wherever you're at. And today we're going to be doing some talking about squashes. Squashes are in season right now. It's one of the reasons I love fall, because I just love cooking with squashes. They're so versatile. I've got here 4 of the ones that I use quite often. This is a really nice acorn squash, really wonderful. Just actually what I like to do with it is I like to just cut it in half. You can kind of give it a little bit of a stability so it doesn't rock or it doesn't fall over. You cut a little bit off the end, and then you cut it in half, take out the seeds, and roast it in the oven. Typically when you're roasting the squash in the oven, you're going to have your oven set at 400 degrees. 400 to 420, because roasting is basically cooking something at a higher temperature so that it caramelizes. So I love this. I love to put just maybe drizzle a little maple syrup in there, maybe a little bit of sprinkle, a little brown sugar. I've also done it where I've cut rings. So you can take the squash, you can seed it, and then you can cut rings, put it on a sheet pan, roast that in the oven, or you can make soup with it, just like we're doing with the butternut tonight. They're actually very interchangeable as well. Butternut is a little sweeter, acorn squash not as sweet. And when you're looking for a ripe acorn, you want to get that one with that little bit of orange on the one side, because that's kind of like where it was lying on the ground, and that's kind of an indicator that it's just a little bit of a riper squash. So you get something a little bit bigger. I like the little ones for individual servings, but the bigger ones are nice. Spaghetti squash, I love those for it actually makes a really great meal. Just the squash itself. There's so many different ways that you can use it as savory. You can use it sweet. Typically what I do is I will cut it in half from the stem end to the bottom. And then there's a little bit of seeds in there. You want to take those out, and then I roast it cut side up. Maybe a little bit of butter on top, oil, just something to keep it moist, a little salt and pepper. Even if I'm doing it with something sweet, I will add maybe a little tiny bit of salt so that it has more flavor, and then maybe a little bit of sugar. And then the nice thing about a spaghetti squash, it does look like spaghetti. You just take a fork, pull it, and you get like little strands, toss it with your favorite pasta sauce. Works out beautifully. It has a tendency to cool very quickly when you're going to use it. So, if you're gonna use it for like a pasta type of thing, a substitute, then I would actually maybe microwave it. You could actually even microwave either one of these in the microwave oven, and I add a little bit of water to my dish so that it kind of gives it a little steam, and they microwave beautifully as well. Butternut squash, my absolute favorite squash. It's real versatile. Soups, I use it for sweet things. I use it for all kinds of things. So one of the tricks on a butternut squash is that when you look at the shape of it, people have a tendency to want to buy this with a really big bulb on it. I like them with a stem that's a lot longer, because the stem is where all the meat is. Once you hit that rounded part on the bottom, it's hollow. So try to find one that has a longer stem and a smaller bulb on it, and you're going to get more yield as far as the what you actually end up with. Again, you want to cut this in half, so here's the trick, guys. And I was going to show you real quickly. I've used every trick in the book as far as how to peel these things. When I roast them, you can either cut them in half and roast them with the skin on, and you would do that cut side up. And I like to cover that sometimes to get it to start, because it ends up going a little bit faster because you've got a little moisture left in there when you cover something. Or I actually, what I like to do is I like to peel them. And the way that I peel them, I'm going to get rid of these guys so we have a little more room. And the way that I peel them is I like to take, this is called a Y peeler. And I like this because it seems to do a better job than your regular, long peeler. And I just start from the top. I have it resting on my counter, and I just go around like this and peel it just like this. Super, super simple to do. And I just bought this peeler. It's an OXO, and my gosh, it is super, super sharp. So when you're using this, if you've got a brand new one, they are pretty sharp, so be really careful. But you know, I really, I love to use this squash because it is so versatile. And what I do, and typically if you've got a bigger one, sometimes it's a little harder to get your knife through it. So what I like to do is I like to use a chef's knife. And so I'll take my chef's knife and I'll lay this on its side, and I'll start with the bottom end, and I'll cut the bottom end off. And those are pretty easy to do, just like this. I'll twist it around and I'll cut that stem end off. Do that before you do anything else, because if you peel this whole thing and you start cutting it in half, it's going to be a lot harder to cut those stem ends off. So this way it rests easier, you can peel it easier. Now, if you've got a really big one, and if it's real solid and it's hard to get your knife through, what I do is I will take it and I will either kind of rock my knife back and forth, or I actually have a rubber mallet, and I take my rubber mallet and I just kind of hit my knife with it so that it slowly goes through the squash, and it seems to work a lot better. And a little less dangerous than you trying to do this and then, you know, and then your knife skipping and it cuts you. You don't want to do that. So when I do use this, and especially if it's a big squash, I'll put this midway down just where the bulb starts to, you know, it started here, and then I'll cut that part off. So I'll separate the stem from the bulb, and then I work accordingly, okay? And basically just slicing it, cutting it into dice, or however it is you want to roast it. So real simple to do once you kind of got your knife through that. This, you know, there's a lot of other little squashes you can do. There's a Hubbard squash, which is a really big guy. Those are nice for, you know, stewing, doing stews, lots of Caribbean dishes that you can do with that. You can roast pretty much any squash. And then this is a pie pumpkin. So, you know, which is basically essentially a squash. And if you want to make your own pumpkin pie filling, don't use your jack-o'-lantern from Halloween. It's typically very, very fibrous. It's typically lacking a lot of flavor because it's so big. You're going to get a lot more flavor if you use a little pie pumpkin than using one of those. So what I would do is, again, I would peel it, you know, using my Y peeler. I would cut the stem end off, you know, scoop out the seeds, cut it into dice, and I would just roast it on a sheet pan until all the liquid comes out. And I'll show you once we kind of work with our roasted squash that I have here. You want to get most of that liquid out, because when you're making a pie, you don't want your filling to be watery. And that will happen. And once you've roasted it, then you can mash it, and that works better. Sometimes people like to steam it or stew it on the stovetop or boil it. And I think that when you do something like that, especially boiling it, you get an awful lot of liquid in it, and it's really hard to get it to dry up. So better way to do it is to roast it if you're going to be using it for a pumpkin pie or anything like that. But, you know, this is the kind of pumpkin that you definitely want to use. So we're going to start off today. We're going to do our, actually do our soup. And I'm going to start off by getting my soup pot hot. And we're doing the butternut squash soup today. And I'm going to start off with a little bit of oil in here. Now, you know, this is we're going to be using vegetable stock for this soup. You can use chicken stock. You could use water. And, you know, all three are perfectly acceptable. My daughter's vegetarian, and since I don't get to feed you guys, I'm going to be using vegetable stock for mine. So we're going to kind of go that route. Your recipe also says to use a little bit of prosciutto or maybe some pancetta or some bacon to saute that first so that you can garnish your soup with that. I'm going to skip that for my daughter because, you know, I have to have somebody eat the food, and she won't eat it if there's any pancetta in it. But, you know, if you're going to get pancetta, which is, it's basically an Italian form of bacon. It's uncured, but it's seasoned. And instead of having the bacon flat, it's rolled. So it's rolled, it looks like basically like a salami. And, you know, when you look at it, when they cut it, it's kind of got a spiral look to it. And then you would cut it into slices and then chop it up and then just saute it so that you render the fat. Real simple to do. So I'm going to start off with my I have what's called a mirepoix, and I'm going to use some carrots. I have onion, and I have some celery here. So we're adding that to our soup pot. And we're going to let that saute for just a minute. All right, and then what I've got here is I've got an apple, and let me see if I can get, hey, Sammy, can I have an apple? I'm sorry. I wanted to show you guys a really easy way to dice an apple. And I know that some people have a problem. It's like, you cut an apple open. How do you dice the thing? It's like, sometimes it boggles people's minds. So I usually hand peel it. I peel it with a paring knife, which works beautifully. And I'm just kind of sauteing the vegetables so that my onions get a little soft. And that's all I'm worried about here. And then what I like to do is I take the apple intact and I'm going to cut it kind of off center so that, the middle is right here. I'm cutting it just a bit off center. And then I do that all 4 sides, okay? So that I end up with just the core that's left, okay? Real easy. And then what I like to do is when I'm slicing it, first I take those lovely stickers off. And then I would just, cut it. So it depends on what kind of a dice you're looking for, how big you want it, so forth. So, that's really, really up to you. And then I cut it in half here, and then I just dice it like this. So real easy way to dice an apple. It's a lot less tedious, a lot less work than, trying to, I don't know, people have all kinds of methods for doing it. And I just find that this is probably the easiest way. All right, so we'll move that off to the side. And just sauteing that so that it kind of starts getting a little soft. All right, and then I'm going to add to this some potatoes. And I have a Yukon Gold potato here that I've diced into, it doesn't really make a difference how you dice this because you're going to puree the soup. You could leave the soup chunky, and a lot of people don't like a pureed soup. They would prefer to have it, so that it has some texture to it. But typically when you're doing a butternut squash soup, you're going to have it so that it has, it's pureed. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. But I'm going to add my potatoes to this, and just not too many, just a little. Potatoes will kind of give it some body. All right, so we'll saute that as well. Real simple soup, guys, super easy. As soon as you get everything chopped up, this goes really fast. All right, and then I'm going to add to this my butternut squash. So I have, again, how big you dice this is going to really determine how long it's going to take to cook. The smaller you dice it, the faster it cooks. So I have it in kind of like small dice. I know you guys can kind of see that. It isn't real big, although I do have a little bit of a bigger pieces. Now, if I was going to, I could roast this. So I'm going to add my butternut squash to this and mix that all in. And we're going to let that just kind of cook for a minute. And then I'm going to add my apples to that. So I had the apple that I was cutting before was a Honeycrisp. But if I want to, I really, honestly, you could use any apple on this. So I think your recipe says to use a Granny Smith, which is a tartar apple. But, if you've got a couple apples laying around and you want to use them and they happen to be a, John of Gold or, Golden Delicious, it's absolutely fine to use it. For a soup, because this is all going to get pureed, it's not that big of an issue. All right, so I'm going to add my apple to this. All right, and then we're going to just give that a stir. And then I am going to add, again, like I said before, I'm going to add some, this is just some vegetable stock, and this is, made with a base. I try to stay away from a lot of bases that have a lot of salt in them because I prefer to add my own salt if I can, instead of having a predetermined amount in your base. And typically a lot of them are very, very salty. My favorite these days is And I know you guys have probably heard of this, but it's better than bouillon. And, you know, they have a whole bunch of different kinds of bases. And I absolutely love the vegetable base because it really tastes like vegetables. A lot of times when you buy those stocks in a container and you taste them, they really have absolutely no flavor. They taste like water. And, you know, I feel that this is just a little bit of a better product. It actually really has a nice vegetable flavor to it. And that's kind of what you want. I mean, if you're going to spend the money and use a vegetable stock, and again, like I said before, you don't have to. You could do water in this. But, you know, if you're going to spend the money, use something that actually has some flavor to it. So I have my base is going in, my stock. And basically what I do is about a tablespoon of stock to about 2 cups of water. I mean, a tablespoon of base to about 2 cups of water. And I'm just going to make sure that this is nice and covered. And your recipe also says to add a little bit of water. So, you know, at this point, because I have really enough flavor from the stock in here, I don't really need to add more stock. What I can do is just add more water, okay? Because at this point, once you puree all those vegetables, you're really not going to need much, you know, other flavor than that, okay? If you guys have questions, please let us know. You know, either Kathy, do you have a chat going, or do you want them just to ask questions? I don't know if Kathy just wants everybody to ask questions or how you guys want to do it. But if you have a question, you know, you're unmuted, you can go ahead and ask. All right. So
Mary?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Nancy. I didn't get any recipes.
Oh, they're going to be sent to you tomorrow.
Okay,
Okay.
fine.
Yeah,
I thought maybe I'd pick up my meal.
what's that?
I thought maybe I'd pick them up when I picked up my meal tomorrow.
Oh, sorry. No.
Okay,
No,
okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome.
Actually, I'm Kathy, who's the librarian here, so I will send them to everyone. If you signed up, and you should be on the list, I will email the recipes as attachments to everyone. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Because you're welcome. We close at 8 o'clock tonight, and they do the announcement at 7:45. So I have to shut everything down here, and I'm in the auditorium. So tomorrow when I come in, actually it'll be tomorrow afternoon because I have late start tomorrow. It'll be probably sometime after 1 in the afternoon, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Right now, you know, your herb garden, if you have an herb garden, it's probably going to town. So right now what I have is I have some fresh sage, and I'm just going to kind of cut those stems off, and I'm just going to throw the leaves in. You don't really even have to chop it up because I can retrieve the sage after the soup is done. So essentially, we're just going to, you know, let the soup boil with the sage leaves the way they are, and then we'll take them out before we actually puree the soup. So I wanted to show you guys how to go about roasting a squash. So I have some of these pieces of this butternut squash left. And how much do you judge as far as how much do you use? A lot of times a recipe will tell you to use a medium squash. Well, you know, this to me is kind of a large squash. This is much more towards being large than being medium. So, you know, to be honest with you, you kind of have to, if I was going to be using a medium squash, I would probably say there would be about 3 to 4 cups of diced squash from a medium squash. If you're looking for a small, then you're going to be looking towards maybe, I don't know, maybe a cup and a half to 2 cups for a small, but that would have to be a pretty small one. And I have seen a lot of small ones. This year, for some reason, the squashes are enormous. And when I bought the one, when I actually cut the one this afternoon for what we're doing here, this thing was about this tall, and it was absolutely huge. And actually I used it for both recipes. So, you know, I had enough to use for both. So if I'm going to be roasting squash, I get myself a sheet pan, and I'm going to use oil, or, you know, you could use butter, but butter has a tendency to burn. So I'm going to use oil, and I'm going to just drizzle some oil into my squash. All right. I'm going to add a little bit of salt, you know, depending on what it is you're making. I actually, when I roasted the squash for the galette, I actually added a little cinnamon to it and a little cayenne. I added a little garlic powder and a little onion powder. And, you know, that kind of really gives it a nice flavor. But, you know, depending on what it is you're making, again, because you can do sweet and you can do savory, that's what it really depends on, all right? So then I would just toss my squash. And when you're roasting anything, especially something like a squash, you want to make sure that you have everything on one layer, okay? You do not want to heap food on a sheet pan when you're roasting, because what's going to happen is it won't roast and it will steam. And all the squash on the bottom of that pile that you have is going to just become, you know, soft, but no flavor because it won't caramelize. So anything that you roast, typically you want it one layer, okay, one level. So that just as a kind of a rule of thumb when you're roasting any vegetables, not just squash. So my liquid is boiling at this point. And basically, so now at this point, I put the oven at 400 degrees. If I want to, you know, have them a little more caramelized, I do it 425, 420, and then roast it in the oven for probably about, you know, I'd say about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. And then, you know, when a knife goes in and out easily, or, you know, if you want it more caramelized, roast it a few more seconds and you'll have a little bit more caramelized flavor to it. But that's the whole point of roasting, is to kind of get those sugars to come out of the vegetables and make them a lot more flavorful, okay? So I'm going to put this off to the side because obviously we don't need it. And I want to show you, so, you know, there's ways that you can garnish the soup. And one of the ways is with the pancetta, which I'm opting not to do today, but I also, you know, you could do some croutons, which I absolutely love on a soup like this. So you could also do a little swirl of sour cream. You could do a little swirl of yogurt, works really nice. And then you can incorporate that into the soup. It has gives it a really nice flavor. But I like to do some croutons, and basically to do croutons, I get myself a nice loaf of kind of like an Italian bread, but not anything too crusty, because I don't want, I just don't want it too, you know, I don't want the outside to get so overcooked that it's really hard to chew through that crust, okay? A crouton should be crispy, but it shouldn't be that crispy that it'll break your teeth if you try to chew into it, okay? So not a good idea. So I'm going to get myself a nonstick pan. I've got the nonstick pan on high heat at this point. You can also do this in the oven. You can roast it at 400 degrees on a sheet pan, just like I did the squash. Toss it with a little bit, you know, squirt a little bit of oil. You could do a little bit of butter if you wanted to. A lot of times I'll add butter if I'm doing it in a saute pan. I like the saute pan better just because it kind of makes them real soft in the middle, but nice and crispy on the outside. So that's my favorite way of doing croutons, is in a saute pan. So I wanted to show you that method. And basically I'm just going to put a little bit of oil in there, and take my Italian bread. And it helps if you cut it a little bit earlier in the day before you need it, so that it gets a little bit drier, okay? So that the outside gets a little drier and it won't absorb as much oil. So I'm going to add my croutons to my pan, all right? And then we just kind of toss and let them cook just like that. And my soup is cooking beautifully, and I'm assuming within, about 10 minutes, the soup will be ready to puree. So I'm going to let that keep going. We got our croutons cooking here. Again, you can do the croutons in the oven if you didn't want to do them on the stovetop. I make a really good salad in the summer, which is called a Panzanella, and it's one of my favorite salads. But it's basically homemade croutons, just like this, and fresh garden tomatoes, cucumbers, thinly sliced red onion, and then tossed with some fresh basil and a really nice red wine vinaigrette. And that's basically it. Real simple, but, you know, just taking advantage of really good produce that's out there at that time of year. All right, so that's basically it. So the next thing we're going to work on after I get my croutons done is we're going to work on our galette, all right? And I love baking galettes because they're so versatile. You can do pretty much any filling you want to do in a galette. And, you know, basically, so what is a galette? It is basically an open-faced tart, free form, kind of like a pie, but without being done in a pie pan. It's just done on a sheet pan. Super, super easy to do, guys. So just let me, I'm going to show you as soon as I don't want to leave these croutons because they're going to burn as soon as I walk away. But these are almost done. I kind of keep flipping them so that all the sides kind of get that brown, but I just love, they get that real nice, like brown, kind of nutty look to them, and they're just delicious. And what happens is that, you rest them on top of the soup and they kind of absorb that soup and they're just yummy. They're real good, guys. All right, so I am just gonna make sure these don't burn for me. And then I'm gonna show you guys how to make dough really, really simply in the food processor for our galette, okay? And you can do this by hand, like you would do any pie dough, but I'm gonna do this one, in the food processor just because this is how I always do it. This dough is it's a butter crust, and it's very, very, very easy to make, very versatile. And this basically at this point, my croutons are basically done. I'm gonna probably not keep, you guys kind of get the picture. I'd like to have them, nice and brown on all sides. So, there maybe one side could use it a little bit more, but you guys kind of understand where I'm going with this. I just don't want to burn them if I take my eyes off of them, okay? So that's my croutons ready to go. All right, we'll put those aside. And so as far as the dough for the galette is concerned, I'm going to move my tray here. I use this dough for a lot of different things. I use it for quiches, and I use it for, any kind of pie. You can use it for, this is a savory dough, so it has no sugar in it, but it's really, really an easy dough to roll out, which is what I really like about it. Real simple to make. All right, so just making sure that is not going to boil over. So I start in my food processor with your recipe is going to be for one galette, all right? But when I make dough, I don't like to, I always make another batch of it. So I always double it, all right? So your recipe is gonna call for 1 1/4 cups of flour. I'm using 2 1/2 cups. So I'm basically doubling it. This will give me two crusts, okay? Two pieces of dough that I can roll out and make 2 galettes with. All right, so I have my flour, 2 1/2 cups. Just all-purpose flour for this. And I also have a pinch of salt is going to go in. All right, and then I also have in the fridge, I have some butter. All right, and then I have, this is unsalted butter. That way I can kind of control how much butter goes in the pie, the dough itself. If it's salted butter and you're using an awful lot, it's going to be pretty salty. And I just want the salt to kind of bring out the flavor of the crust. I don't want to really give it a saltiness, okay? So it's cold. I took it right out of the fridge. And earlier I cut it into pieces, all right? So I'm going to put this right into my food processor. Real easy. And what we're going to do now is I am just going to process this so that the butter kind of incorporates into the flour, and you're going to kind of hear it. I hope you can hear it. You're going to hear that kind of the butter bouncing around in there. Then when you kind of stop hearing that bouncing around, that's when you're ready to start adding your liquid, okay? But I'm going to go ahead and start this. But you can hear that it's kind of noisy, bouncing around, okay? And then now it's kind of getting a little quieter. Okay, it's not bouncing around quite so much. And what I'm looking for is for it to be kind of like cornmeal. Okay, so I get little pieces of butter in here, and it's not smooth whatsoever, but it's more like a cornmeal. Okay, so it just takes a couple seconds to do that. And then I'm going to take my feed tube out of here. And I'm just going to keep kind of stirring my soup so that it doesn't stick on the bottom. I have some really cold water, ice cold water. All right, now this is a little tricky, but once you kind of get the hang of it, get the feel of it, it's not hard at all. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my machine on and I'm going to start pouring the water in the machine, but I don't continuously pour. I let it incorporate a little bit. So I pour it in maybe a couple tablespoons. I'm letting it incorporate. I'm adding a little bit more water, letting it incorporate some more. You don't want to add all your water all at once because it will get too soggy, too wet. And then you're going to end up, doing that game where you put more flour, then more water. You don't want to do that. But I see that it's kind of starting a little bit to come together, adding a little bit more water. Again, like maybe a couple tablespoons at a time. Then I see that it's spinning a little bit more. Okay. Add just a touch more water. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but now this is just starting to pick up all the balls of dough and we're done. Okay, super, super easy to make dough. Basically, what I have, now this is dough for two crusts, okay? So you can make 2 galettes out of this. And what I do is I just kind of form this into a disc, okay? And at this point, I am going to cut this in half because I can make one really big galette as long as I had a nice big sheet pan to put it on. Or I'm going to cut, as I said before, I'm going to cut this in half, okay? And then I'm going to take each half and then kind of give it a head start by making it into a circle so that when I'm rolling it, I'm not fighting with it to become a circle, okay? If I don't do this, it'll become a square instead of a circle. But at this point, if you're not going to use it right away, you could actually, you could freeze this, you could refrigerate it, you could make it. And this works a lot better if you make it the day before or even 2 days before, keep it in your fridge, let it get nice and cold, and then it rolls a lot better for you, okay? So I have one that I made earlier. Okay, same dough. And I put this in a plastic wrap. I kind of do this all the time, guys. And then I just kind of cover this and put that in the fridge. Okay, that goes in the fridge overnight or just for a few hours until it gets nice and solid and doesn't get sticky. Okay, because right now it's kind of soft and it will kind of be sticky. So at this point, I'm going to take some flour and we're going to roll our dough out. And what I'm going to look for first is I want my sheet pan. So I'm just using a standard cookie sheet and I've got a piece of parchment paper that's lined the cookie sheet. That's it. Okay, so nothing fancy. And for this, I do like to use parchment because it helps to release the tart when the tart is done, all right? So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and roll this dough out. Just a little bit of flour on my board. And my rolling pin. So I just get both sides nice and floury. And remember, I want this to be a nice circle because I want this to look kind of, you want it to look rustic, but you don't want it to look oblong, okay? You want it to be a circle. All right, so I'm gonna start in the center always, and I keep turning this so that I get it nice and even. All right, I'm gonna go the other side. Again, just like this. But I just love the way this dough works. It just is such an easy dough to work with. Everybody's kind of following me? Nobody has any questions or anything? Okay, I'm going to keep rolling and make this into a nice circle. Okay, now at this point, I'm going to make this so I want this to be about the size of my sheet pan, but I want the edges to kind of hang over my sheet pan, okay? And I'll show you why once we get this all rolled out, but there's a reason for that. So I'm gonna keep rolling this to a nice circle. And if you keep turning it, you'll get a nice circle shape, all right? And so this is such a beautiful dough. Just love working with it. All right. Keep rolling it, and I can kind of gauge how big this is going to be. All right, kind of make sure that you get the ends so that the ends aren't really big or thick. And then I'm gonna take that dough, we'll move our sheet pan over here. And we're gonna put our dough right on the sheet pan. So it's just a little bit too big, okay? Which is absolutely perfectly fine. So I'm gonna put my dough there, and we're going to take, so I'm gonna start constructing my galette. And you can use anything. I've made galettes with caramelized onions at the bottom. You could do some ricotta cheese. You could do mascarpone, either sweet or savory. And then just spread that on, or you could do just some cheddar would be beautiful. You know, would really, honestly, whatever you want. This one I like to do with a little bit of, this is a Boursin, okay? Boursin comes in a little box like this, and it comes in like an aluminum foil. Whoa, so I made sure that this is room temperature, so this is spreadable for me. And what I do is you just peel this off, okay? And then this is a Boursin with, I think it's with garlic and fine herbs. So it has a little bit of flavor to it. All right. But Boursin, you can get it in the, and I got mine at Meijer's, and it was in the produce department where they have the specialty cheeses. It was right there, and they have different varieties, so you can really choose what you would like. So kind of hold down your paper so your galette doesn't go sliding around. So I'm just going to go ahead and spread this. Now I'm always going to make sure that I leave at least about an inch edge on this, so that you know, I have a way to finish this galette. If I don't leave an edge, it's just going to be kind of sloppy. All right. So just make sure that you leave somewhat of an edge on this. All right, just like this. And I think I have a nice enough edge. So your total circumference where you're going to have food actually on this is about an inch away from the edge of the galette, okay? So real easy. All right, and then I am going to add, and earlier I actually, I did some, just some red onions that I kind of sauteed and caramelized a little bit, and a little bit of oil. You could use butter, and just until they got nice and soft, okay? So I'm gonna add my onions to this. You red onions, guys, because red onions are a little sweeter. Typically, if I'm doing something like this where, you know, I want a little bit of sweetness on it, I would use a red onion or a white onion. Spanish onions are much more savory. They're much stronger. Hey, Sammy, can you open that door? All right, so I'm just gonna spread these around. I have my support staff in the back. I gotta keep them on their toes once in a while, guys. All right. Just like this. All right, no big deal. And then I have my butternut squash. So you can see that when you're roasting the squash too, you kind of periodically want to stir it so that it doesn't, if you have it on the bottom too much or you don't stir it, only one side is going to caramelize. So I want that caramelization to happen. And this is what you're going to see when you caramelize your squash. It's going to become a little bit brown, and it just starts to taste sweeter. It has a much sweeter flavor. It's absolutely delicious. So I'm going to throw some of that butternut squash on here. A nice layer. Okay. Again, acorn squash would work with this. Delicata squash is a nice squash that would work with this as well. Delicata squash is, you know, the word delicate because the peel on that is very delicate, and a lot of people actually just eat the peel. They just, you know, slice it, roast it, and then eat the actual peel on it. So, you know, you can find those now too. They're in season. So, you know, most squashes right now are in season. All right, I'm gonna put this aside. Okay, so now at this point, I am going to add a little Parmesan cheese. You don't have to, you know, honestly, these are so versatile. You can honestly do whatever you want to do. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to add cheese if you don't want to. I like a little bit of that cheesiness in it. It really makes it taste good. So now I'm gonna finish the galette. And the way that you finish is basically you wanna take this edge, and I hope everybody can see this, but I'm just gonna fold it over just like that. And then I'm gonna keep going around, and then I keep kind of folding it as I go around, okay? Real simple. So that it's gonna cover the edge of the filling that you've just made. All right? Real simple, real simple. And then you wanna make sure that you do those little creases. And the creases are just you know, folding those edges over. If you don't do the creases and you have a little bit of a runnier filling on your galette, sometimes that runny filling will flow through the crease, you know, through the slits, and you're gonna end up with a mess. So you always wanna make sure you try to get those creases on your galette. And then I have some beautiful sage, all right? I'm just gonna put nice whole pieces on here, just like this. And then one more little one. I don't know about you guys, but my sage in my garden has taken off like you would not believe. It is everywhere. It's just crazy. Then I have a little heavy cream, and that is just to kind of go over the edge of my galette to kind of give it a shininess. Really, that's all it's gonna do. So no big deal, but you know, if you don't have it, you can do a little bit of butter, or you can do an egg wash, whatever you wanna do. I like the cream because it really kind of gives it really that nice shininess. All right, so there's my cream on that. And that goes in the oven, probably, oh, I would say that it's about 350 degrees for probably about maybe 35 minutes, depending on your oven. If it's a hotter oven, it will take less time, but you know, about 35, 40 minutes. I always, when I put something like this in the oven, I always put it in for less time. So if your recipe says 45 minutes, I put it in for 25, and then I can always add more time. I can't take time away, but I can add more, okay? So my soup is almost ready to be pureed. I'm gonna take my finished galette out of the oven, just like the magic of television. All right, and there is my finished galette. This one goes in the oven to bake. But this is the finished version, so you guys can kind of see that, how that looks. Absolutely, you know, I've done in the summer with tomatoes are really great right now. And what I would do is I would do nice thick slices of tomato. You can put the tomatoes around the galette, a little mozzarella cheese on the bottom, thinly sliced onion on, very, very thinly sliced onion on top, salt and pepper, and pop it in the oven. That's a great little galette, using up some really nice tomatoes that, you know, that are in season right now. All right, so I'm gonna take my knife, if I can find it, and I wanted to show you what this looks like cut. So basically, just like cutting a pizza, we're gonna take that and we're gonna cut it right in half. All right. And then I would just take it and cut it just like a pizza. All right, and it just like that, guys. And there's your galette, all right? I hope you guys, can you guys see that? Can everybody see that? Okay, cool, all right. And honestly, I love it room temperature, but you can certainly do it warm. You can, and if anybody has an air fryer, pop it in your air fryer and heat it up for, I think, 10 minutes in your air fryer. It will crisp it up, you know, beautifully. You can also pop it in the oven and let it crisp up in the oven as well. So there's different options as far as reheating this too, okay? So now that my soup is pretty much done, I'm gonna add some cinnamon, just a pinch of cinnamon to this. I'm gonna add a little bit of curry powder. All right, so just a little bit of curry powder, and you don't have to. I like the flavor of curry powder, so, you know, I like to add that. And just for a little acidity, I'm gonna put a little bit of apple cider vinegar in here, okay? Just a drizzle. And that's gonna give our soup not so much sweetness. It's gonna round out the flavors with a little bit of acid, okay? So we'll give that one last stir. And at this point, our soup is pretty much done, except for blending it. And I'm gonna go ahead and move this to my cutting board, and we're gonna blend it with an immersion blender, all right? And I'm gonna grab my Immersion Blender. So if you guys have one of these, it's a great little gadget to use. Essentially just, you don't have to use a blender. Immersion Blender, just, one thing to clean instead of the whole jar, and then you don't have to have something else that you need to, put into your, put the soup in as you're blending it. It's just in one pot, which is really, really nice. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of water in case I need to thin my soup a little bit. By cooking it and, cooking it and letting it simmer or boil, you're gonna evaporate some of that liquid that was intended for your soup. So at this point, I'm gonna add just a little bit more liquid in order to, not have it so dry. Okay, is essentially what I'm looking for. All right, so basically, now you always want to, when you're doing your Immersion Blender, you always want to keep your Immersion Blender in your pot. Don't lift it up with it on. It's going to go all over everything, guys. Basically just like this. And you want to definitely make sure that your soup is, everything is cooked in here so that you don't, nothing is raw. Okay, but I can tell that that's the case because I'm not meeting any resistance with the blender. All right, it works out beautifully. All right, so just kind of, I let that go like this at an angle. And until we got this nice and blended. Whoops, I just unplugged it. Hang on one second, guys. The electricity is going to foil us. All right, there we go. And you could stop it right here. I have a little bit of chunks left in this. I've got some potatoes that weren't blended, some carrots. I'm going to leave it like that actually, so that we can kind of keep going here. But you could blend it so that it's completely blended if you want to, or you could stop it and have it just a little more texture to it. That works just as well. And got a nice. So I need to taste this. I need to make sure that seasoning is correct. All right, so I have not added any salt to this. With soup, you need to add salt. Otherwise, it's just gonna taste flat. So we'll stir it in. Oh my gosh. Really, really good, guys. Just make sure that when you cook this initially, be a little bit wary on how much liquid you put in. You don't want to inundate it with liquid right away because you'll end up with a real watery soup. I want something that's kind of thick, you know what I mean? That has some texture to it. All right, so there's my soup. Looks absolutely beautiful. Well, tastes so good. I can taste the apple in it and so forth. So here is my soup going into my bowl. Okay, and then I would garnish with my croutons, which are right here. I could squeeze a little bit of, sour cream on top. That's also nice, but we're just going to do the croutons today. So, that works just as well. So anyway, that is my butternut squash soup, as well as my galette. Let me move this out of the way so you guys can see this better. Anybody have any questions? All right, here we go. There's my galette and there is my soup. So super easy, two super easy recipes, guys. The basic hard part of the recipe is getting everything prepped. But like you saw what I did, that's called mise en place. Very basic principle of cooking. If you have everything cut up beforehand, takes you a couple minutes to throw everything in the pot, get it cooking, and then you have dinner in no time, okay? It's just that initial getting everything, chopped up and so forth, all right? So any questions or anything? And if not, I want to thank you guys. I want to thank Kathy for allowing me to come, and do a demo for the library. My only regret is I can't let you guys taste this, but hopefully, and I am doing some more Zoom library demos. I think some of the libraries are not having people back in person yet, but there are some that are actually having people back. And so I'm doing a little bit of both at this point. But you know, hopefully maybe the next one that we do in Livonia will be an in-person demo. We'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, we'll play it by ear.
Yeah.
And because I thought these were really excellent recipes. And again, I apologize. If people were expecting to get the recipes emailed ahead, I will be sure to, I've got the list, as I said, of whether people, if they didn't show up because I was keeping track, I'm going to email it out to everybody on the entire list. Again, I might be able to get that out tonight because it seemed like this was timed, you know, I was allowing more time just in case on your end. So I should be able to just go there and then just do a mass email tonight.
Perfect.
And send them both as attachments to everyone. Okay.
Perfect.
So
one more thing I wanted to mention about squash, guys. Really nice thing about squash is that, you know, you can get it really, really inexpensive right now. Squash is like, you know, in the dead of winter or in the spring, it's extremely, I mean, they go by the pound. So now if you go someplace, and I get a lot of my squash and my produce right now from Blocks. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's by the airport, a big farm market. And what I typically do is I buy a whole bushel of it and I keep it covered with hay and newspaper in a box, even on my patio. I have a covered patio. Keep it on my patio or someplace in your garage. You know, everybody's got a Michigan refrigerator, they call it, you know, your garage. And last year, I think I used my last squash in February and it was absolutely perfect. So you can definitely do that, you know, layer it with newspaper and it's good to go. So this is the time of year to be buying it.
Mary,
Yes.
can you tell me the spices you put on your squash when you baked it again?
Yes, I put a little bit of, it was onion powder, it was a little garlic powder, a tiny bit of cinnamon, and it was a little tiny bit of cayenne pepper. If you don't want cayenne pepper, just eliminate it. You know, it kind of gives it a touch of heat, which is good in this soup because it has, you know, has a lot of sweet flavors in it. So you kind of want to balance the heat with it too. So, but you don't have to. So just cayenne, onion powder, garlic powder, salt and pepper. And that was it, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, guys. It was nice hearing from all of you. Thank you so much.
and it was
Thank you, Mary.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you to everyone who showed up. Yes. And Mary,
Thank you
it
for
was-
hosting.
Thanks, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Thank you so
everyone.
much. We
Okay.
appreciate you doing this for us.
Well, and we're going to have, we're hopefully going to have Mary come back to do a live show. We're starting to do that again here. And I know she was here and did the Instant Pot. That was all pre-COVID, of course, which was very awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
Good
you.
night, everybody. If you have to drive
Thank
somewhere,
you. Thank you.
drive
Yeah, be
Bye.
careful.
okay.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Kathy.
Sure.